Today's lesson is the piece of string. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today we are going to be talking about our literature unit for the month of June. We're talking about an old short story by a famous French writer. I'm not good at French. Mike, I guess you know some French. How do you say this guy's name?
Guy de Maupassant.
Guy de Maupassant. Okay, I hope I said that right. And it's his baby. He wrote this short story way back in 1883. And it's entitled The Piece of String. And it's a very interesting story about greed and face and mistaken identity and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, it is. Quite a dramatic story, I guess you could say, and one of those stories where you definitely feel for one of the main characters. He seems to have all the forces in his world lined up against him. So let's find out more about it as we read the first part of our article and story, The Piece of String. The Piece of String.
It was market day in Goderville, and the public square was bursting with activity, filled with the shouts of people buying and selling. Mr. Hauschkorn had just arrived to participate in some bargaining when he spotted a piece of string on the ground. Believing nothing useful should be thrown away, he bent down to pick it up, but as he did, his eyes caught those of Mr. Mallandane, a man with whom he had a bad relationship due to a business dispute. Feeling ashamed, Hauschkorn hastily concealed the string while pretending to look for something else, and then went on his way.
大家好，第一部分我们看到单字 hastily， 这个字是副词，指匆忙的或是仓促的。例如 Sharon hastily grabbed her bag and ran out the door. Sharon 匆忙地抓起包包跑出门。或是Sorry if this meat isn't too good. I cooked it rather hastily. 如果这块肉不太好吃，很抱歉，我煮得有点仓促。另外补充这个字的形容词 hasty, H-A-S-T-Y, hasty, 意思是匆忙的或是仓促的。像是 Think carefully and don't make a hasty decision. 仔细考虑，别做仓促的决定。也可以说 Time was running out.So Jenny wrote a hasty answer to the last question. 时间快结束了，所以 Jenny 仓促地写出最后一题的答案。接下来我们看到动词 conceal， 表示隐藏、隐瞒或是掩盖。举例来说 Brad concealed his money in a special belt. Brad 把钱藏在特殊的腰带里。或是 The criminal's gun was concealed beneath his jacket, so the police could not see it.那名罪犯把他的枪藏在夹克底下，所以警察看不到。另外补充一个同义词 bury, B-U-R-Y, bury, 意思是掩埋、埋葬或是埋藏。我们可以说 The landslide buried several homes in the mountain village. 土石流掩埋了山上村庄的多栋房屋。也可以说 The man buried the treasure chest in the ground.那名男子把藏宝箱埋进地里。
Okay, first of all, let's talk about the title here, The Piece of String. String is very thin. It's not as thick as a rope, and it's not as thin as thread. You use thread to sew with. When you sew garments or clothes, you use thread. And when you're wrapping up your rice dumplings for Duanwujie, for a Dragon Boat Festival, you will wrap them in bamboo leaves, and then you will tie them together using string. So that's what string is, and string can be useful for a lot of things, and in this particular story, a piece of string is involved. Now, here in the first part, it says, It was market day in Goderville, and the public square was bursting with activity, filled with the shouts of people buying and selling. That certainly is a very familiar sound or a familiar scene that is seen here in Taiwan on market days when lots and lots of people head down to the traditional market and they're wanting to buy stuff and sell stuff. So, of course, in this particular case, they've got this market day in Goderville in France, and it's in the public square in the middle of town, and it's bursting with activity. If something's bursting with something, that means there's a lot of that thing. So, indeed, it's very now. It's very active. It's very lively. There's a lot of activity.
Absolutely. You can imagine your local market early in the morning when everyone's out there getting their fresh meat and vegetables and stuff like that. Lots of activity, lots of people. And so then we read Mr. Hauschkorn had just arrived to participate in some bargaining when he spotted a piece of string on the ground. Oh, that's slightly interesting, but let's go back and find out about this character. He's one of our main characters. I guess he's a local. He lives in the town. He buys his meat and veg at the market just like everyone else does. And he's a guy who's looking for a good price on things. We know that because he's arrived to participate in some bargaining. He hasn't just arrived to buy some things. No, he wants to bargain for things before he buys them. Basically, when you're bargaining, you could also say you're haggling, H-A-G-G-L-E, haggle, that's the verb. Basically, you're arguing, but not in an angry way. You're just discussing a price and the difference in what you want to pay versus what the person selling wants to accept. So, they'd say $100, you say $50, and then in the end, you end up around $75 or something like that. So he's looking for a good deal, basically, and he's not afraid to, express his opinion if the price is too high. So he's there to do that, but he spots a piece of string, or he sees a piece of string on the ground. This is not a strange thing, I suppose. It's a busy market, lots of people there. Some string could fall off a box or out of someone's pocket. So believing nothing useful should be thrown away, he bent down to pick it up. But as he did, his eyes caught those of Mr. Mallandane, a man with whom he had a bad relationship due to a business dispute. Suddenly our story gets a little bit more interesting. So he sees the string. Mr. Hauschkorn thinks, well, it's a piece of string. But he's the kind of guy who bargains for things. He's maybe the kind of guy who's looking to save a little bit of money anywhere he can. So he's also thinking, it's a piece of string. It might be garbage for someone, but it might be useful for me. It'll save me a few dollars or whatever. I won't have to buy some more string in the future. So he decides to take it home with him. He bends down to pick it up. But as he does, imagine him bending down and he feels someone watching him and he looks up. And as he looks up, he sees this other man, maybe across the street or just standing nearby, Mr. Mallandane, looking at him. Now, who's Mr. Mallandane? Well, he is a man with whom Mr. Hauschkorn has a history, a man with whom he had a bad relationship due to a business dispute. These two guys are not friends. They've had some kind of problem, argument, difficulty in the past. There's some bad feeling between them, and even now, they haven't said sorry. They haven't, made friends again. They have a bad relationship. And this was all down to something involving money and business, a business dispute. Basically, they might have invested in something. Someone felt that the other person wasn't paying their share. It ended in an argument, and they've never really been friends since then.
So he doesn't want to be seen picking up the piece of string. So it says here, feeling ashamed, Hauschkorn hastily concealed the string while pretending to look for something else and then went on his way. So again, he felt ashamed. He had this conflict with Mr. Mallandane before, and he was embarrassed to be picking up a piece of string. So I guess Mr. Mallandane did not notice that Mr. Hauschkorn was picking up a piece of string because he quickly concealed the string and then he pretended that he was actually looking for something else. So remember, if you feel ashamed, you've done something that is embarrassing. And if people discover that you've done this thing, you will lose face. They will laugh at you. They will tell other people about this silly thing that you did, and you will feel very, very embarrassed. So yes, he felt ashamed. So he concealed the string. He hid the string so that his arch enemy would not see the string, and then he pretended to be looking for something else. Maybe he thought he was looking for a coin, or maybe some money that somebody dropped, or maybe he's just looking at different soil samples on the ground there.
Whatever it was, he did it quite quickly. That's why we said there he hastily concealed the string. This is kind of embarrassing. embarrassing. He feels ashamed. And then he went on his way and he kind of walked off. You can imagine him whistling, kind of looking out of the side of his eyes back at Mr. Mallandane. Mr. Mallandane watching him very carefully. It was a kind of a strange situation. It was just a piece of string on the ground. You wouldn't think anything of it, but these two men reacted in a slightly strange way, like they were a little worried or interested in what happened. And we're going to find out more about what happens in the next part of our article.
Later, when everyone was gathered in the local tavern to eat and discuss the day's deals, it was announced that a pocketbook containing important papers and a large sum of money had been lost at the market. Hauschkorn believed it had nothing to do with him until police arrived and asked him to accompany them to the mayor's office.
第二部分我们看到单字 tavern， 这个字是名词，指小酒馆或是酒吧。像是 If you visit England, you must have a pint at a local tavern. 如果你造访英格兰，一定要到当地小酒馆喝一杯。或是 There was a tavern in town where travelers could get a tasty meal. 那座小镇里有一家小酒馆，旅客们可以在那吃到美味的食物。另外补充一个同义名词 bar, B-A-R, bar, 意思是酒吧。例如Simon and his colleagues went to a bar after work. Simon 和他的同事们下班后去一间酒吧。或者 The bar on the corner is pretty good. Maybe we can get a drink there sometime. 转角的那间酒吧很不错，或许我们改天可以去喝一杯。最后我们看到动词 accompany， 指陪同、陪伴、伴随或是随着点点点一起发生。例如 Richard offered to accompany Olivia on the trip to 台中。Richard 自愿提出要陪 Olivia 去台中旅行。或是 The steak was accompanied by a baked potato and a salad. 这份牛排附有一颗烤马铃薯和一份沙拉。
Okay, it's time for us to talk about the second part of our article for today. Now, later, when everyone was gathered in the local tavern to eat and discuss the day's deals, it was announced that a pocketbook containing important papers and a large sum of money had been lost at the market. So in some of these small towns in France or England or wherever, they have places where people go to gather after a day's work. They go there to have some beer or some wine or whiskey or whatever, and that place is called a tavern. It's the same thing as a bar or a pub, and you can drink there. You could also maybe get something to eat. So people gathered in the local tavern, and they were going to discuss the day's deals. They were going to talk about what happened in the market, who sold what for how much money, what was the supply, where did the materials come from. They were just discussing the deals that took place. But then somebody said, hey, I've got some news. Hey, a pocketbook was stolen, or it had been lost, and that pocketbook or that wallet had some important papers inside it and a lot of money inside it, and it had been lost in the market. Hey, did somebody turn it in? Has it been found? We don't really know.
This is a bit of local gossip about possibly even a crime happening, and you can kind of imagine that in this small French town, crime isn't something that happens very often. So this is, of course, very exciting for the local folks. And it said there that a pocketbook, it's not a small book, although you might imagine that it is. But basically, yes, as Roger explained, it's kind of a wallet. You might call your wallet your pocketbook, your billfold. That's another term people might use. So yeah, it had important papers in it. You can imagine ID cards or important legal papers and a lot of money. Often when people go to the market, especially, they're bringing a lot of money. If they're buying supplies for their home or their restaurant or something like that, they might spend a lot that day. Well, Hauschkorn believed it had nothing to do with him until police arrived and asked him to accompany them to the mayor's office. Very interesting. So it had nothing to do with him. That's what Hauschkorn thought. He was in the market today. He didn't see anyone drop money or anything. He picked up a piece of string, but that wasn't a pocketbook. So, of course, he thinks it has nothing to do with him. You're not involved. You know, this has nothing to do with you. You have no responsibility in this matter. So you say it had nothing to do with me, or I had nothing to do with the situation. He thought this until the police arrived. So the police came into the tavern, walked around and looked around, came over to Mr. Hauschkorn and asked him, excuse me, sir, can you accompany us to the mayor's office? Suddenly things are getting serious, because if the police are asking you to accompany them somewhere, they're asking you to go somewhere with them. And it's probably not to give you a birthday present or something like that. It's to ask you questions, to, take you to the scene of a crime, to take you to the police station for an interview. In this case, they took him to the mayor's office. So basically, they're asking him to come downtown. We have some questions to ask you. And this is the kind of thing that would make anyone a little bit nervous.
Indeed, and he thought he had nothing to do with the missing pocketbook. Why are you asking me to accompany you to the mayor's office? That's ridiculous. I'm innocent. I didn't do anything, but I guess that's what's happening here. Maybe he's being framed for the missing pocketbook. We'll find out what happens next in the third part of our lesson. Let's listen to it now.
When they arrived, Malindane was there, having named Hauschkorn as the pocketbook thief. Shocked but not surprised, Hauschkorn explained that what he had picked up was actually a piece of string. He produced it as evidence, but the mayor was not convinced. Malindane, after all, was not known to be a liar.
Okay, so again, where we left off, the police had come to the tavern and they asked Mr. Hauschkorn to accompany them to the mayor's office, or maybe City Hall. And when they arrived, Malindane was there, having named Hauschkorn as the pocketbook thief. So they arrived at the mayor's office, and his arch enemy was there, Mr. Malindane. He was there. And he had named Hauschkorn as the pocketbook thief. He said he's the one who stole the pocketbook. He's the one responsible for the missing pocketbook. And it looks like Mr. Hauschkorn is in trouble, even though he's completely innocent.
Oh my gosh. Shocked, but not surprised, it says. Hauschkorn explained that what he had picked up was actually a piece of string. Okay, so he's there. He's been accused of stealing something. This Malindane character, the man who he had a business dispute with, seems to be the one making the accusation or pointing his finger and saying it was him. But so Hauschkorn, of course, is shocked, but he's not surprised. And that's probably because, as we read earlier, he had a bad relationship with Mr. Malindane. They had a problem in the past, this business dispute. So if someone's going to try to get Hauschkorn in trouble, Hauschkorn expects or guesses that it's probably Malindane. Oh, this is Malindane up to his dirty tricks again. That's what Hauschkorn is thinking to himself. But he figures the truth will win through. The truth will get him out of trouble. So he explained that what he had picked up in the market was actually a piece of string, right? Malindane's accusing me of picking something up. I did pick something up, but it wasn't a pocketbook. It wasn't money. It was a piece of string. And to make the police believe him, he pulls it out of his pocket.
That's what he did, all right. So that's his explanation. I did not take someone's pocketbook. I actually just bent down to pick up a piece of string. That's what I was doing. I was not trying to steal someone's pocketbook. And then he produced the piece of string as evidence. So here it says he produced it as evidence, but the mayor was not convinced. Now, evidence is proof that something took place. If police or detectives are investigating a crime scene, they are looking for evidence. Maybe a dropped cigarette butt or fingerprints or other things like that. Those would be examples of evidence. And remember, evidence is a non-count noun, so you are not permitted to add an S to this word in any circumstance. Evidence is non-count, so they're looking for evidence at the scene of the crime. And here Mr. Hauschkorn produced a piece of string as evidence to his innocence, but the mayor was not convinced. If you're convinced, that means you believe what somebody else is telling you. But in this particular case, the mayor was not convinced. He did not believe Mr. Hauschkorn. He was actually more convinced by Mr. Malindane's explanation. Here it says Malindane, after all, was not known to be a liar. So I guess he had a good reputation in the town, and they'd rather believe him than Hauschkorn.
Very, very interesting. So it seems that Hauschkorn has a bit of a spotty history in town. People think he might not be totally honest all the time, whereas Malindane apparently, is a perfect example of an honest businessman. We'll find out more.
And that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Let's listen now to our Chinese teacher who always tells the truth.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第3部分的最后提到 Mr. Hauschkorn 把他捡到的那条绳子拿出来作为证据， But the mayor was not convinced.Mollendane, after all, was not known to be a liar. 好，那这边会有3个重点，我们来看第一个是看 convince 和 persuade 这2个动词的异同。convince 它有使什么什么信服、使相信的意思，我们可以用 convince somebody of something， 或者是 convince somebody 加上 that 子句去表达说使某人相信某事为真。就像是我们说 The man convinced the detectives of his innocence， 就可以表达那名男子使警探相信他是清白的。那我们在字典上面也会看到 convince 它有列出说服、劝服的意思，然后它列出说用法是 convince somebody to 加原形动词，说服某人做某事。好，那这时候 convince 它就相当于 persuade 的同义字了。好，那我们再看到 persuade 它有说服、劝服的意思，它的用法是 persuade somebody to 加原形动词，或者是 persuade somebody into 加上动词 ing。 那我们也会在字典上面看到 persuade 它还有列出使信服、使相信的那种意思，那用法是 persuade somebody 加上 that 子句。那这时候 persuade 又相当于 convince 的同义字了。这样听起来 convince 和 persuade 可以互相替换，意思都一样，只是用法略有不同，这样是吗？确实啦，这2者它是有被互换使用的情形，可是还是要提醒同学们 convince 通常是用来表达使某人相信某事为真，那么 persuade 通常会用来表达说服某人做某事。那么2者比较常见的互换用法就是用 convince somebody to do something 或是 persuade somebody to do something 去表达说服某人做某事。可是有些人还是认为 convince 在这样的用法当中是不正确的，应该用 persuade 才对。那这个说法也提供给同学们做参考。好，下一个重点是要介绍 after all 的2种用法。第一种呢，就是课文用法，用来可能说明理由啊，或者是提出解释，就相当于中文的毕竟。举例来说 I think you should apologize to her. After all, she's your best friend. 我认为你应该向她道歉，毕竟她是你最要好的朋友嘛。好，那么第2个用法，我们可以用 after all 来表达说结果跟先前的认知不同，就相当于中文的终究怎么样还是怎么样。像以前我带一位日本朋友去逛夜市，他本来想吃看看臭豆腐，结果一闻到味道还是跨不出那一步。这时候我们就可以造个例句说 She didn't have the courage to try stinky tofu after all. 她终究还是没有勇气去尝试臭豆腐。第3个要介绍的重点是 somebody or something be known to 加原形动词，这是表达说大家都知道某人或某事物怎么样怎么样，或是某人或某事物会做某事。好，那么文中他写到 Mollendane ... was not known to be a liar， 意思是大家不认为 Mollendane 是个骗子。那我们来造一个例句Regular exercise is known to have many health benefits. 大家都知道规律运动有许多健康益处。好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Bargain. Ingrid's grandmother likes to bargain with the vendors at the market. Dispute. Horace got into a dispute with Lizzie about how much money he owed her. Ashamed.Winnie was too ashamed to admit that she had been fired. Conceal. The prisoner concealed the packet of cigarettes when he saw the guard approaching. Accompany. Lily accompanied her father to the supermarket to buy some cheese. Evidence. The lawyer produced a number of photographs as evidence of the defendant's guilt. Convince. Molly was convinced that her son was telling the truth, but her husband disagreed. Liar.Once people think you are a liar, they won't believe anything you say. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.